Students, I will explain to you the most reading materials of task 1, which is called World Wide Web. So you can find in the first slide the definition of web information system, which is simply an information system that uses the internet technology. The purpose of the web information system is always to deliver information and services to the users, or maybe sometimes other information systems. So this is the definition, the web information system. Information system using the internet to deliver information and services. Then the second slide we will find just an overview about the British scientist, which is his name Tim Berners-Lee, who is the inventor of the World Wide Web. He has published a proposal to invent the World Wide Web in 1991 when he was working in CERN, which is an organization for scientific research in Switzerland. Now, the goal of his proposal is to provide the researchers with the ability to share results, techniques, and practices without using the email. As we can find now with the of course the internet, we can use it to share knowledge, to share information. So this is the idea of the World Wide Web, which is invented by this guy, his name Tim Berners-Lee. After that, we can find in his proposal, Tim Berners-Lee, what are the main features of the web, which is very important to remember. It has 5 main components or features. The first one is URL, the second one is HTTP, the third one is software program, and what we call it now web server, HTML to publish a document, and again another program which is the browser to make, of course, requests to the server. So these are the main components of the web, which is proposed by Tim Berners-Lee. Until today, since 1999, until today, the web is working or implemented using these 5 features, main features or components. Now, after that, we have a comparison between a web application and desktop application. So we want to see the advantage and disadvantage of web application compared to the desktop application. So the advantage of web application, as we can find here, is accessible from anywhere, from any computer, from any of course device. We can access to the web application using mobile, using tablet, using computer. But of course, these devices need to be connected with the internet. The second advantage, we can use it with the different operating system and different browser. Now, easier to update the web application because we need only to update the version which is already installed on the web server, and then the client can get the updated version of the web application. Now it has centralized storage on the server, and for sure this one, it has other of course issues to be considered, like the security and the connection with the internet and the other issue. But these are some of the advantage of the web application compared with the desktop application. Now, regarding the disadvantage of using the web application, of course, if I want to access to the web application, I need to be connected to the internet. There are some issues regarding the security, the storage, and sometimes we have a problem with a certain website when we try to browse it with some of the browser. So again, we need to recognize the advantage and disadvantage of using the web application instead of the desktop application. Now, another thing we need also to focus on it here in this task is the difference between a static website and dynamic website. What's the meaning of a static website? As we can find here, contains web page with fixed content. Now, the best example of a static website, for example, Sohar University website, when we try to access to this website, all of us, we will see the same page. As we can find here in the definition, display the same information to every visitor, to every user. So if all of us try to access to Sahara University website, all of us we will see the same page. Because of that, we call the static website contains web page with fixed content. Now, mostly the static websites are coded or designed using HTML language, and of course it's easy to create and doesn't require a web programmer or database designed to create the static website. Now, when we talk about the dynamic website on the other side, the dynamic website display what? Not fixed content, various content type every time it's browsed. Now, example of dynamic website, this is also, we use it in Sahara University. For example, the Educate, the registration page that we use it to register every semester. This one is dynamic page, dynamic website. When you access to it is different from different student or other students, because if we are in level 1, so it will display level 1 student, but for level 4 will register in level 4 for example courses. So it's different content from one user to another. So this kind of website, we call it dynamic website because the contents are created or generated at real time. And as we say, the page content of dynamic website, it's different for user to user. Compare it with the static website, as we said, is similar to all users. Now, another example of dynamic website, for example, the weather website. Maybe for me, I'm checking the weather of Sohar, will give me details about the weather of Sohar, but maybe my friend is checking the weather of Muscat. So here in this case, different content we can find on the page. So this kind of website, we call it dynamic website. Now, of course, for designing such website, dynamic website, it's required to use web programming and database design. Now, this is the comparison between a dynamic website and a static website. The last thing we talk about it here regarding the static website, dynamic website, and the new generation of the website, they call it Web 2. And this Web 2, as we said, or as I said just now, is described the second generation of the World Wide Web. This kind of website is focused on the ability of people to collaborate and share information online. Now, example of Web 2 website, what we call it social network or social media website, because this kind of website will allow the people to collaborate and share information by using, for example, post some message, interact with the website. So we call it Web 2 website. Many examples, we have Facebook, we have for example Twitter. All of these are, we call it Web 2 website. Now this term Web 2, it has two meanings, one for the users and one for the developer. Let us see what it means to the users and developer. Now, for the users, Web 2 for us now, it's became what? Interactive experience. As we said, I can interact with the website, I can like some post, interact with some message, reply to it, for example, a comment to it. So then the website became interactive. This is the meaning for the Web 2 for the user. Now, what about the developers? What's the meaning of Web 2 for the developers? Now, for the developers, change the way of designing the website, creating the website. For such interactive website, previously we have to use like what we call it server-side programming, like PHP and the other programming language. But now we can even use client-side programming like JavaScript to design and create some such website. And of course, this kind of programming, we call it run client-side programming. It's code. It will run in the browser, not necessary to be sent to the server and interpreted, executed on the server. So the way of developing the website for the developer is different. Instead of using server-side programming, we can also use JavaScript programming. Now we will move to other part here in this task to understand some, of course, protocols and terms as, of course, proposed by, for example, the features of the web by the British guy Tim Berners-Lee. Now, before that, we need to know the meaning of domain name system, which is simply maps the name people use to locate a website to the IP address that the computer uses to locate a website. Now, for example, to access to any website, we are not using IP address. We are using the name, for example, of that website. For example, www.google.com. This is what we call it domain name. Why they use domain name, not using IP address? Because as a human, it's difficult for us to remember numbers, but easy for us to remember names like Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Hotmail, and these names are easy to remember. Because of that, they use this system, which is called domain name. Each IP address, it has or it mapped with what name. So when we type Google, but in reality, this name, it will be converted into IP address, and then the request will be sent to the target server. Now, this domain name that, as we can find here in this figure, it has been, of course, divided into multiple parts, called label, or what we call it subdivision. So the domain name, always it will be written from right to left. So we have the top level domain, which is, for example, .com, .om, .org, .net. So here we call it, this is the this subdivision is called top level domain. Then we have second level domain, which is the name of the domain. Then we have third level domain. So here we are using always www, and sometimes we have another subdivision is called fourth level domain. So always we read the domain name system from right to left, as we can find here: top level, second level, third level, and fourth level domain. Another thing we have it, which is again this component proposed by Tim Berners-Lee, is called Uniform Resource Locator. So very simply, there is no resource over the internet has no address. So anything on the internet should have address. This address, or this web address, is called Uniform Resource Locator. So here, as we can find here, specify the location of a resource. What kind of resources? For example, web page. We have, for example, image, video, sound file, CSS file, JavaScript file. Any resources on the internet must be specified by using the web address, or accessible by using the URL address. So specify the location of a resource on the internet. These are the components of the URL address, or the web address, starting with the protocol. Then we have the domain name. Just now we have mentioned it, that always is mapped to IP address. Then we have the path of the file that we are targeting, a query string in case if we need to send some data to the target server. And we have also, which is optional part, is called a fragment. So these are the components of the URL address. Another protocol we need to know about it, we need to know how to define it, which is called hypertext transfer protocol. Now it has different tasks. The first task is to establish connection with the server. Now, for example, when I try to access to a server, the HTTP protocol will establish connection with that server, and of course is using this port number, which is 80. So in addition to the established connection with the server or between a client and server, the communication between a client and the web server is done by using the HTTP request message and HTTP response message. So when I type, for example, www.google.com and hit or press enter on the keyboard, that means I'm requesting to access to this website from the server. This is the request, and then when the website is displayed on the browser, that means the server respond to the client and display the website of Google to me using the browser. So again, we can find another definition for the HTTP, define how this message, HTTP request and HTTP response message, are formatted and transmitted to communicate between client and server. So the client and server, they communicate with each other using the HTTP messages, which are called request and response messages. Now, regarding the HTTP request methods, HTTP is using different types of requests from the server, request some resources, request maybe some services. So the request, let us say, methods are divided into common request method and other request methods. Now, regarding the common request method used by HTTP protocol are GET, POST, and HEAD request. These are the common request method used by HTTP. Other request other request method also used by HTTP are PUT, DELETE, CONNECT, TRACE, and OPTIONS, which are rarely used. So commonly we are using, or the HTTP is using, GET, POST, HEAD request method to request from the server. As we say, the communication between a client and server is done by exchanging message. From a client to server is called request message. From server to client is called response message. Now, how the client requests from the server some resources using these methods, GET, POST, and HEAD. And as we said, there are other methods, but these are rarely used. Okay, so we need to remember the difference between the two categories of this method, which method is common method and which method is rarely used by HTTP protocol. Now, the last thing we have it here in this task, we need to know what's the meaning of web server and what's the meaning of web stack and the component of the web stack. Now, here very simply, the web server, if we want to define it, is just a computer, but this computer stores web server software and the website component file. So I have a website, I put it on the web server, and the website component, as we know, we have HTML document, we have image, we have CSS style sheet in addition to the JavaScript file, and maybe other files of course, for the use it with the website. So this is the meaning of the web server. Is a computer, it stores web server software and website component, as we can find it here in this slide. So the task of the web server, in addition to storing the software and the website component, is respond to HTTP request. So the server always is listening to the client request. So the client requests from the server and the server respond to HTTP request. Always this HTTP request, its direction from client to server, and the server respond to the request of the client. Now, we have something else here regarding the web server. It's called web stack. So here we need to talk about the tools and technologies used for web development, or the web stack simply is a collection of software required for what? For web development. So for web development, what I need, what type of tools, what type of technologies I use it to develop, let us say, a website, develop a dynamic website, for example. Now, the web stack include these components: operating system, web server software, a database, and in addition to the scripting language to process dynamic requests. So in other words, on the web server, we can find operating system, we can find web server software, we can find database, we can find scripting language, and this scripting language will be used to process dynamic requests. All of these components together, we call it, or it's called, web stack, that we find it on the server. Again, this one to host, for example, web application, or to develop a web application. So all of these are the requirements for the web server. This is everything for this task one. Thank you so much, students, and I wish you all the best, and please stay safe.